Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Digital Native Podcast, the show where we focus on some of the innovative things engineering leaders are building and what they've learned along the way. My name is Ryan Anderson from Google. Today we have Dan Gaul and Brandon Clark, the CTO and the engineering lead from Digital Trends. Thanks for joining, guys.
Hi, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
So great. So I think I want to talk about your guys' company and the growth, and I think it's really exciting. It's a really exciting, unique story. Before we do that, though, would love just kind of a quick introduction and some background on both of you guys, and how you got into technology.
Sure. So my name is Dan Gaul. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Digital Trends. My background originally was a major in mathematics at the UW, and I was paying my own way and ran out of money. So I was trying to find a job, ended up getting a permanent temp job at Microsoft on the Exchange and NTP server team, and I never looked back. So worked at Microsoft for 2 years and went over to Real Networks for 5 years before moving over full-time to our company.
Go Dogs.
Yeah.
So I'm Brandon. I'm the director of engineering. Wow, it's a long story, so I have to pick some of the more pertinent details. But my history has been one of I've always been a jack of all trades. I've done a lot of different things, a lot of them involving tech. I've been in IT support. I've done the startup thing. I've done, obviously a programmer. I've done the administration thing. Had a number of jobs early on. You guys remember CompUSA? I used to work in their tech shop in the back. So that was a fun job. And, I ended up doing, remote tech support for them, driving around people's houses and then, installing computers and webcams and, removing malware and stuff like that. And that was a lot of fun. And I actually ended up making a little bit of a career out of that. I found out that I was pretty good at explaining technology to people. So I ended up starting my own consulting business for a little bit. Did that for a couple of years and was pretty successful. But and then I had my son was born, and I needed health insurance, so I went back to the 9-to-5 thing. Worked at a manufacturing plant for a little while. Did a little brief contract stint at Intel, which was that was meaningful for me, just because that was always kind of on my list of life ambitions. I always wanted to work for Intel, so it was cool to check that box off. The funny thing is when I was working there, I was super bored actually. So I used to work on the NQL technician team, just basically QAing network drivers, super dry. So I figured out how to automate my job. And while I was letting my scripts do my work for me, I was teaching myself how to program and a whole bunch of different frameworks and stuff like that.
I love it. Think smarter, not work harder.
Yeah, exactly. And just kind of jumped around across a couple startups, did some agency work, and then eventually landed here at DT. Dan brought me on to start the whole engineering apparatus at the company, and so I was developer number one there, and it's been a long road.
Love it. And we talk about Digital Trends as a startup, but you guys have been around a long time. I mean, you were founded back in 2006. This question directed at Dan. Take me back. For me, I was aware of Digital Trends. I was that kid in middle school who, had the first edition of the Palm Pilot and had it set up across the class to ping my friend. And we thought it was crazy that we were sending each other messages in class. But, take me back to the early days of Digital Trends, kind of how it was formed, and tell me more about the company.
Yeah, so origin story in a sense from a very quick high-level view instead of a 30-minute story is Ian's my business partner. He's the CEO. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. We were in line to go get food in the buffet, and he was talking to this guy in between us, and it happened to go wow, where'd you get that? I've never seen that before. And I was curious and leaned over and started listening, and they were talking about this phone that wasn't on the market yet, a mobile phone. And the guy was like, I'm a merchandiser for Office Depot. Before we put things out on the shelf, I get to actually touch them and play with them and see if it's something we want to sell. And he was like, man, I wish I could get my hands on cool stuff like that for free. If only I had a website, I bet I could get stuff in. And I was leaned over. I was an engineer at the time, and I was playing with PHP and JavaScript and all that. I was like, hey, I'll build the website if you get the stuff in. So that's how we started keeping in touch and trying to figure out how we would build a website and what it would look like, and evolved eventually over many different sites, eventually into what is Digital Trends that we launched in 2006. And
That's awesome.
It
And
was
again,
super tiny.
no, that's great. And again, you've been around since 2006, but it's really over the last three or 4 years. What I learned when I started learning more about you guys was, you guys have 30 million, active viewers every month, which goes up to 100 million when you include things like social video. What do you attribute that growth to over the last few years?
Well, we're a bootstrap company. We never have taken VC funding. So it's been a long haul for us where everybody else in the industry is either backed by a large media company or they're getting VC money, and they have to try to figure out how to grow the audience as quick as possible. Ian and I focused on what we liked, which was we both had a passion around technology. But we realized early on we didn't want to focus on the specs and kind of like the more geeky aspects. We wanted to really focus on, was it cool? Was it designed well? Like, did it actually function the way that you were expecting it to? And that slowly over the years, we realized that was our voice and what differentiated us from everybody else. Everybody else had all these benchmarks, reviewing video cards and all this stuff. And we were more like the graphic scene. If you run in these games, try to a little bit of specs, but enough. Like, most people don't really care about it, right? Like, when you buy a mobile phone, nobody cares what type of processor's in it. Does it take good photos? Does it do what I need it to do? They don't care how much memory or anything like that. So that's basically what differentiated us from everybody else, and that's how we ended up growing. It was a slow and steady race, keeping very focused, not being distracted by what was hot in the industry that nobody had really figured out. Like video 5 years ago was becoming really hot, and nobody really knew how to do it. They just felt like we needed to do it. So people were building these expensive studios and investing in all this equipment, creating this video, and then not making any money, and it would end up causing their companies to fold. And we were just like, we're not falling for that. We're just going to keep focusing on what we do really well, which is create great content, editorial at that time around reviews. So TVs were like the largest TV reviewer site, right? Mobile phones, anything that was interesting to us at touch technology. Even we do cars. And then now we're getting into video, but we let it kind of burn in a little bit through the industry, and we're able to really take a look at it and go, what is working, and what do we think will work well for us, for our audience, and for our advertisers. So for us, supplemental. We've always done supplemental video for reviews, just because some people want to watch a review instead of read it. But mainly for us, it's live video now, and being able to cut those up into segments that we can push off across all the other OTT products.
No, I love it. And you speak to, it's not about the production value, and not to say, you guys have, incredible production value now, especially compared to what I'm doing for my podcast. But, it's about the content. I love that. And it's like, who cares how shiny it is if the heart of the matter and with what we're talking about doesn't speak to the individual, doesn't speak to what it enables them to do.
Yeah.
So
our thing is, content is king. Content is king at the end of the day. Why would anybody come to us if we're not writing something that's compelling? The other thing we want to make sure is we're not, I don't know if I can curse or not, but we're not assholes, right? A lot of people in our space try to get traffic by being controversial and, not being good partners, right? And we've always had pride in making sure we're not necessarily controversial. What we want to do is be honest. And if somebody sends us, for example, a review that's not on the market yet, we want to give them honest feedback on what is happening with that product before they release it, so that it can actually be a better product for everybody else. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And building a great long-term brand.
Yep.
And I think you guys have been really smart around, there's a specific type of consumer that you guys are targeting as well, right?
Yeah, we call it the Henry Millennial. So high earners, not rich yet. We didn't come up with that. I think it was like a Bloomberg and Goldman Sachs acronym. But basically, it's people that are out of college, have their first real job, have some expendable income. It's usually about 100,000 or more, and buying like a car, maybe their first condo or apartment. They care about the products that they're purchasing, what their money goes to.
That's great. So transitioning a little bit, I mean, we talked about the growth over the last 3 years or so. Brandon, directed at you, what has it been like, as an engineering manager and leader to experience that kind of growth? What have been some of the challenges?
A story I like to tell is, when I first got brought on board, we were very much in startup mode. We used to be able to fit the entire company around a breakfast table. And that was something fun. That was always part of our culture. It's like, every Friday, every other Friday, all the work would stop. We'd go out down the street, get breakfast and just kind of socialize and talk. And, we'd come back and maybe sometimes we'd play some video games. I don't know. It was kind of cool. But, all of us were always super dedicated to what we were doing. We always had pride in our work. So yeah, it's been interesting watching the company grow. It's funny talking to people that, they've come on in the last couple of years in the company and, they view me as old guard, and I still feel the same as I did, almost 10 years ago. And it's like, what? But it's interesting. Yeah, you see a lot of new faces now, and it's hard to keep track of everyone. It's like, wait, I haven't met that person yet. I haven't met that person yet. And it's just, we've grown so much, because when I started, we were at maybe around 15 people, and, we're well over 100 now, across the country, multiple offices. And, the way that we're regarded, I think, is what's most surprising to me now, just having been there from the beginning and having my perception of it. It's like, even talking to you on occasion, Ryan, it's like you get a little glimpse from the outside of what people see, and, they see something much more grandiose than you perceive from the inside. And it's like, wow, we actually are well regarded, and we make a good product and people have heard of us. And that's super cool. And I've always taken a lot of pride in having been a part of building that.
No, that's great. And how many people part of the Breakfast Club now? No, I'm joking.
We don't do breakfast anymore, but we do beverage Fridays.
I love it.
At least in Portland, and that would ranges. Actually, we have more people now that we're all working from home than we would in the office, which is awesome. One thing real quick, I think, with the growth of the company and engineering challenges is that we still are a content company. So content creation came first before anything else. And so engineering, we didn't really invest very heavy there because we weren't building necessarily these big technology platforms to help us get what we needed to do. There was already existing stuff out there that we were utilizing and modifying, but that's changed now, and more recently, especially, where we are becoming more of a technology company, or we are a technology company building our own solutions to solve our needs. And that means we've had to invest more into engineering. But along with that is a history of a company being content driven and then slowly starting to shift into a technology company across the board means we're now dealing with things we haven't had to deal with in the past in a very quick, trying to solve them in a quick way. And a lot of that is just, process across the company. And like Brandon mentioned, like not knowing necessarily everybody in the company. So somebody in New York may not even know who's on the engineering team or how the engineering team works. So it's trying to solve those other weird soft problems within the company.
Yeah, and trying to keep that culture too. And Brandon, talking about your perspective, I think the people and having that perspective keeps it a special place as well.
Yeah.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit. I took a look at the site this morning, and I think what's neat is you guys have a lot of articles right now on how to work from home. You have guides on social distancing, which are awesome resources, obviously, very relevant right now. But specific to your team, I mean, how are you guys managing during this difficult time? And are there any tips that you have to maybe other companies who are less experienced with working from home or working remote?
Yeah, I can take this one. So, the funny thing about engineering teams is that we're already kind of accustomed to this type of, style of work. And our engineering culture, I've always been the type of manager where I don't, if people need to take a couple days, for some head down time, get some work done, and they need to be free of distraction, that's always been something that's been encouraged in our teams. We've always heavily promoted the whole work-life balance. And, if you need to come in late or work weird hours, it's fine. So, we're kind of accustomed to that. But, that being said, this has been a little strange. So, I mean, I won't say that there hasn't been some cabin fever and, some slight shift in behavior. Like we spend a lot of time talking with each other over Slack. I'm noticing that, we're spending more and more time on Zoom, but not particularly with an agenda in mind or like for a meeting or anything. We're just like, I'm going to turn on Zoom for a little bit. And if you guys want to pretend like you're in the same room, that's cool. So we've been doing a lot of that. And yesterday we were doing a QA session on some new features that we're going to be releasing, and we did it collaboratively over Zoom. We didn't have to; we could have done it over Slack, but there's just that social element that you crave. That being said, beyond our team, I've seen some pretty amazing things come out of our teams. We're seeing, like Dan mentioned earlier, we do happy hours over Zoom now, and I've seen some charity events around that have been really successful. The leadership from the top has just been amazing. Just a couple of days ago, our CEO Ian sent out a really nice positive email to the entire company, and it was a neat way to connect because he was including pictures of his family and of his dog, and talking about some of his unique challenges, and kind of it's one of the things that I really enjoy about Digital Trends is it's a very human company. That it definitely comes through not just in our content but in our business culture as well. Dan and Ian have always been amazing about putting the people first, and that really comes across. And we've found other ways and other outlets, to kind of keep our sanity. Like, we recently started a home cooking Slack channel where people get to share, pictures and recipes and stuff that they've been working on while they've been in isolation. And that's been super cool. And you kind of get a glimpse into everyone else's lives. So, in conclusion, it's been a little strange, but for the most part, for us, it's been business as usual.
Yeah, for me, there's a lot of Zoom going on, but I think the first thing as a company, what we wanted to do is right away we published to the company a Zoom directory because now not everybody's walking to a meeting room in a physical location, but we wanted to make those meeting rooms available for people that didn't have necessarily a premium Zoom account where they needed more than 45 minutes to have a meeting. And then we published a internal page, or I would actually call it a site, around how to work from home during this time and things to do to like stay active, how to have some fun, what are the resources for health and all that other stuff. So we try to move really quick to make sure that our employees had those resources available to them. I think that's a big key to the working from home. The other thing I personally been trying to tell people is like working from home, it gets really easy to spend more time in front of your computer than you would in an office setting, and to not feel guilty about getting up and taking time. You need to take, I think, more time, especially in a scenario like this where people are going a little bit stir crazy. You don't want them feeling trapped in front of the computer. So just try to really take care of yourself in a mental way. We've been playing a lot of like social games like Jackbox TV. I've been doing it with my family since we started working from home. Been starting to do it with a few coworkers and friends, and then our beverage Friday, we did a Jackbox game session during that as well. So it's just kind of really making sure that lots of communications happening and people are being effective from working from home, which again, a technology company, I don't think it's not too hard, but it's the mental health side, making sure people are taking care of themselves, right? Not just the work. And then a challenge we did have was the live video production. That was the one thing that we were most concerned about. But luckily we have these backpacks that allow them to stream from anywhere. We use them at like the trade shows like CES or Mobile World Congress. So they're using those to stream from their houses, and then our producers are editing directly from their homes. So those packs are streaming to their editing setup. And it's just really interesting how they've been able to tackle that. That was one of the biggest concerns.
That's interesting. I love hearing around, the creative things that teams and companies and leaders are doing to really bring people together, which is so important right now. So a difficult time, obviously, for many businesses, a lot of uncertainty. In my industry, a lot of sales folks I've heard from have recently been laid off. Engineers across the city, I know that there's been a number of startups make announcements on certain layoffs. And then I think, there's a new wave of potential engineers coming in from school who are going to be looking for jobs in the next few months. For you guys, having gone through that, worked at, big companies, startups, what kind of advice do you have for folks that are in that position and potentially looking for their first or a new engineering job?
Well, I can speak to what I look for, when I try to recruit engineers. One of the things that I like to do is I like to find smart people, not necessarily skilled people, because there is a distinction to be made. I feel like there's two kinds of engineers. There's the kind that they know a bunch of technologies, or they know the latest programming language, or they know this framework or anything like that, and that's all well and great, especially if that's something that we're currently using. But that doesn't necessarily translate them to being a good engineer. So, I like to look for people who are smart and have a strong desire to learn. It doesn't matter if they know the current tech that we're using. If they demonstrate the ability to pick things up quickly and apply that knowledge, that's way more valuable, because you can train up a smart developer. But it can be really challenging to, as they say, teach an old dog new tricks. So I like to look for people who are, they do engineering work as a hobby. They're hobbyists. They're innovators. These are people that they work on little side projects at home at night. And they tinker and they try things, and then they experiment. It's like, because I'm looking for people who bring ideas. Like I said, not necessarily specific skills. And also what we look for is me specifically for my team, I like to look for people who want to own some aspect of the business, because there's a difference between an engineer who's just doing a 9 to 5. They go in, they do their work, they follow a script, and then they go home and then they don't think about it. The really good engineers, they're problem solving constantly. They're thinking of new things. They're grokking their aspect of the business, and they know everything about it, and how they would improve it and how they would contribute. And honestly, one of the things I've learned in recent years too, when looking for engineers, is the importance of soft skills. Paul worked with those people who don't necessarily have the best soft skills, and you start to see the importance of that. The ability to handle conflict resolution, the ability to collaborate, and also taking constructive feedback is a really important one. It's like, I know a lot of engineers tend to have that stigma of ego, and a lot of what I like to say to people is, leave your ego at the door. It's like, you got to come in, you got to be willing to learn, you got to be willing to grow, and really that's what it comes down to. Is we look for people who want to grow, not just someone who's just there for a 9 to 5.
Yeah, and for me, like, just to add on to Brandon real quick, the thing that I always look for from people were, especially the juniors coming out of college, is find a project that you want to solve on your own. Like, don't wait to get a job, because that's, for me, when I was learning, that was the easiest and the best way for me to learn engineering skills, was to find a problem I wanted to tackle for myself, or something I thought was interesting. And it's not about reading a book from cover to cover, but using resources to help you solve those problems while you're working on that project. And then also, to go off of what Brian was saying, is I look for pride. Like, you could have the crappiest engineering project at a job, but if you can still find something to be proud of, or ways to make it better that you can be proud of. And I think that's a big key not just to your own sanity, but what you can bring to a company is like, you know what, like, I was at Microsoft, people worked on the Barney dinosaur game that had that animatronic doll. And like, people were like, I'm going insane. All I hear is, I love you, like all day long, like, you know, but they're finding ways like, but actually like the robotics within the doll are really cool. Like, and, you know, they're trying to find those highlights within their job. So like, that's a great way to basically be an asset, is to bring that positivity and that pride to a new job.
No, I love that.
Just to add one more thing, you know, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that, you know, programming and engineering isn't always necessarily about the technology. Ultimately, an engineering job is about problem solving. So, you know, people who are good problem solvers are going to make good engineers. If you're not interested in solving problems, then maybe it's not for you.
Well, I think that's the fun part about the job, is really seeing, you know, the end user use it, whether or not they like it or not. If they don't, they give you feedback, you go and improve it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And you get that dopamine hit. You're like, oh yeah, I solved that problem. Now on to the next one, you know?
Especially if it's something that you hated working on. Like, you're like, oh yeah, it worked so good. I'm so happy. Like,
yes. Completely. So moving beyond, you know, kind of the pandemic at hand right now and the landscape, what do you guys think are some of the top challenges for technology and engineering leaders, just in general?
Morale. That would be the one with the capital M, I would say. And, you know, and that's always an issue as far as engineering leadership, but right now it's more so. You know, and the reason for that is you've got, you know, increased isolation, you've got longer hours, and inevitably and unavoidably you have a work-life imbalance right now, because your work life and your home life are just unavoidably intermingled right now. And, you know, that has an impact. So, you know, I try to be mindful of the mental health of my teams in that regard. And, you know, that's why we try to find ways to, you know, relieve some of the pressure by, you know, not having all the interactions be, you know, work related. It's good to have some of that extracurricular casual downtime. Another thing that I would say is financial uncertainty is a huge fear right now. You know, because we don't know what the long-term impact of this whole pandemic is going to be. And so you're going to see a lot of companies go under, you know, you're going to see a lot of companies are going to contract, and people are going to be very conservative with their money because they don't know what the future looks like. And so that has a huge impact on recruiting and, you know, and investment of resources. And so that's going to have an impact for sure. So we're going to have to find ways to deal with that. And then, you know, I would also say that, you know, just the fewer opportunities for networking could have a longer term effect too, is, you know, despite the stigma that engineers have about being kind of antisocial, we actually are kind of social creatures. And a lot of what helps people innovate is that cross-pollination of ideas. And, you know, you get that by going to, you know, conferences and talking to people and meet and greets and happy hours and stuff like that. And so we lose a lot of that in being isolated like this. And so I think, you know, some opportunities might be lost.
Yeah, I would, from a leadership standpoint, I would say, don't get stuck on technology that you're familiar with. You should always be keeping an ear open. And part of that is through networking, et cetera, and embrace the opportunity to learn something new, or at least find out about something. I'd also say security. Like, security is such a big issue now. And I think it needs to be forward first with security. I would say, like, we haven't always done the best, but we also aren't open to a lot of the issues that other companies have. Like, we don't have a user base or anything like that where people are logging in, but it doesn't mean that we're not susceptible to a breach of some kind. So, every day still you hear about massive ones. I think Marriott had one yesterday or the day before. So, and then something that I always see is that engineering teams want to put their own stamp within a business, or at least an engineering leader. So a lot of times when someone goes to a new business, they're like, oh, I think we could build our own, right? And I don't think that's always the right solution. I think sometimes that can go into wasting a lot of money and time. And instead looking and seeing what is available to us that maybe we can either utilize, modify, or whatever, right? Instead of just always build it. I think we have to be very wary of that.
And that's a good transition. You mentioned, you spoke a little bit about, understanding your resources. You guys have experience, for me, a big part of starting this show was kind of sharing best practice, talking about what folks have done and learned and built and, what they would have done differently. So moving more, you guys, your platform, you've been on-prem, you have experience, in the public cloud. You're not currently using Google Cloud. We're working on that. But, some of the analytics stack I know you're using. Walk me through how you were first introduced to cloud technology. Would love to hear just kind of some more of the background on how you've built the platform.
Where to begin?
What you get is we've always been bare metal for a long time. And then when cloud started becoming a thing, we're on WordPress, and WordPress was not structured to handle very well on the cloud, let alone how we use it. Like most people, when they're using it, it's a single database, not a lot of caching. You don't have any like Nginx or anything running. So like Rackspace, we were on Rackspace back in the day, and Rackspace introduced their version of the cloud, and we were like, maybe we should try that and see. It was an absolute disaster, total nightmare, and that was, I think, a great time for us to go. You know what? One of those areas where the big shiny object, we're going to ignore that for a while and just keep doing what we need to do. We need to just make sure the servers are stable. And then we just recently, then we went to like a mixed bare metal cloud base where we, Brandon and his team were writing our own services for like processing images and things like that and storing them. And those were all cloud based. And then finally this year, Brandon and our DevOps guy got us moved over 100% to the cloud.
And Brandon, for you guys, what was the trigger that kind of caused you to do that complete move?
So it's something that we'd been wanting to do for a long time. In our engineering team, we really embrace the whole DevOps culture. It's the rapidly iterate, fail fast, always be improving. And, we have a very small team for the size of the output that we create. I would say we punch above our weight class. So we don't have a lot of people to manage, systems and, infrastructure and stuff like that. And yeah, it was just like Dan said, it was just basically me and another guy kind of running the whole show. And really what pushed us to finally do it was, we started working on a disaster recovery solution because, we started to get a little nervous because you see things like, the whole AWS outage and Dying outage and, just various outages that bring down half the internet. And we're like, oh, crap, what do we do if that happens to us? And so, you get that paranoid thought, what if our data center burns down? Or what if I get hit by a bus or something? You have to start thinking about those things. You have to start thinking about business continuity. And so we started our cloud adventure by basically replicating our entire stack in cloud form so that, in an emergency, we could very quickly switch over from our colo over to the cloud. And our goal was to make that transition as seamless and fast and non-disruptive as possible. And so, this is around the time where we were starting to get really heavily into, provisioning technologies and server configuration management. So, we did Chef for a little bit, and then we went to Puppet, and now we're using Ansible. And then we evolved to like a mix of Ansible and Docker and Terraform. And so it became really easy to, provision our entire infrastructure, in a declarative way. And so it just kind of naturally led that way. And it's like, so, okay, we can provision onto the cloud very easily. So why don't we just make that final transition and just do that? And, that opened up a lot of doors for us. It lets us operate really efficiently with the few resources that we have. One of the benefits that cloud really offers us is the ability to compose services, together from smaller services rather than having to build everything from scratch. That's kind of where the technology is heading these days, to where it's less common for anyone to build anything in house because you have all these commodity components. It's like Legos, and you can just kind of wire them all together and get these really sophisticated, high availability distributed platforms that do just as well as if you had coded it from scratch. And so that has let us, automate a lot of our mundane operations and focus a lot more on the business strategy, which is definitely a lot more productive for us. I don't want my DevOps guy focusing on the latest security kernel patches, right? It's a waste of time. It's like I would rather have him, working on an architecture strategy or figuring out how to solve a problem for a microservice I need built, rather than all the other stuff. So, it allows us to be agile, scale quickly, and most importantly, it allows costs to be predictable for us. Whereas before, you have, even when we were kind of hybrid bare metal cloud, it was still really unpredictable what would happen if we really needed to scale up or if we needed to spin up some more websites. Now it's very predictable. And we can do that in an automated way very, very quickly. So it's allowed us to become very nimble.
You don't have to worry about our colo company going away.
Right.
Wasting money because maybe, at the time our code efficiency wasn't that great. So we needed more servers, and then all of a sudden we get more efficient and we have more servers than we need. But we're in a contract, so it's hard to take away. Or for some reason, again, the scaling issue on the fly, being able to spin up new servers, you can't do that bare metal, and it's bare metal's fast, especially if they're all in the same data center and connected on the same network and everything. But I think moving over to the cloud was the right move for us for sure.
Yeah, it was a huge difference being able to go from whenever we needed to provision a new server, that was easily a 2-week process. We were able to take provisioning new services from 2 weeks down to less than an hour. That's a big deal for us.
That's awesome. And anything, in hindsight that you wish you would have known when you started a lot of these projects, or anything that you've changed your opinion on since?
Going back to the Rackspace cloud story, it seemed like such a good idea at the time. And, we struggled so hard, trying to migrate our platform to that. And, at the time we were like, oh, this service sucks. We need to come back to this when it evolves a little bit. But you know what? In hindsight, it wasn't really them. It was just the fact that, the way that we were building technology didn't lend itself to that. And so over the years, as we started evolving so that we could move to a cloud, architecture, we realized that, it wasn't them, it was us, and I wish I'd known that at the time, and we probably would have made that migration a lot sooner.
Well, and I would recommend, it's almost like going back to don't do cowboy coding, have a mitigation plan that is 100% reversible and very quick, right? Don't have just this false hope that it's going to work. You never know what type of issues in your code are going to not be cloud friendly. So mitigation plan is number one thing to have.
That's awesome. Not throwing shade on Rackspace, but they used to be my customer. And so I would always fly down in San Antonio. They have an office that was an old shopping mall.
Yeah.
That they've kind of recreated into. It's just bizarre. It's really interesting though. So we can talk more about that later. So you spoke to, what you wish you would have known in hindsight, kind of more in general, as you've grown in your careers. Any mistakes that you guys have made that are top of mind, and how have you evolved?
I got a couple. You want to go first, Dan?
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Here.
So yeah, I got a couple of mistakes that I know that I've made, and I've definitely learned lessons from. One, as an engineering leader, You know, one painful mistake that I made in the past was waiting too long to address personnel issues. You know, you get hung up on certain aspects of management and, you know, managing a department, and you're like, well, I don't have a lot of resources. You know, if you start to feel kind of lucky with the resources that you have. And so you find that you put up with things that you probably shouldn't put up with. You know, it's like maybe you have an underperformer on your team. You know they're not doing a good job, but you want to let them go, but you really need that manpower. And so you wait. But you don't realize that, you know, there are implications to that. There's harm in waiting too long to address those kinds of situations. You know, I found that, you know, that created all kinds of morale issues, and, you know, and it ended up being a disservice, not only to the other members of the team, but, you know, other departments, and even to the person themselves. You know, it's like, rather than giving them the opportunity to be free to grow and maybe find something that they would be more happy with, you know, that you're keeping them there, you know? So, you know, that was something that I definitely took to heart. And, you know, that was a hard one for me, just because I ran my teams kind of like the way that, you know, Dan originally managed me early on when we were really, really small. And, you know, the way our company started, and it still kind of feels like this to some extent, it has this very much a family feel, like, you know, your coworkers are your family. And, you know, as a company grows, you have to evolve a little bit beyond that and start, you know, growing up a little bit and realizing that, you know, at the end of the day, this is a business. We're here to get this job done, and people need to be able to perform, and you need to be able to provide them that feedback. And, you know, a lot of what I learned, it had a lot to do with vocabulary, surprisingly. You know, I learned that it was a mistake to call my coworkers family, like in that regard, because, you know, if you think about it, you know, how do you confront family when they disappoint you, for example? You know, it's like, you put up with it. You know, they're your family. You deal with it. You move on. But that's not necessarily what you should be doing when you're trying to grow a business. You know, it's like, you need to correct issues, and you need to replace parts that don't work, and you need to allow people to grow and to mentor people. So, you know, that was a lesson that I learned too, is that, you know, to have those interactions be much more professional, learn to identify personnel issues much earlier. So that was a huge lesson for me. And then there's another one that I have that I like to call the $30,000 mistake, which I'm sure Dan remembers this one. And this was basically the result of deploying at 5 p.m. on a Friday, which is like the ultimate no-no in engineering. You never do that. And, you know, early in your career, when you're a little bit more cavalier about that kind of thing, the company's a little smaller. You know, you're like, yeah, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do this anyway because it's the weekend and I want to get out of here. And, you know, one of the lesson I had to learn from that is I had to be able to comprehend the weight of even minor changes. And that's something that has been a huge shift mentally, you know, starting in the company when it was so small, and having, you know, still being here almost 10 years later when, you know, we're very much enterprise scale now. And, you know, little things like that, they're so much more expensive to make mistakes now. And so, you know, that was a hard lesson to learn. And, you know, that's something that I've definitely passed on to my team, you know, try to emphasize that, because you don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for sharing.
I've got, as an engineering leader, like, one of the things early on when Ian and I first started the business was having to learn how to speak to others within the business and outside the business as not an engineer. It's so easy to get caught up in, like, the normal terminology of your daily life that is completely Greek to everybody else. You have to remove yourself and find a way to speak to others that are not in your normal, you know, social norm or understanding. And basically coding is a language, right? So it's called a language, but So I had to learn all through the years on how to try to talk that, and that now we call that basically being able to have a business acumen, right? Like even if you're not a business owner, you need to know how to speak to other leaders in the company. Another early lesson was backing up, and I don't think that is so much. It shouldn't be a problem nowadays, but you should always have a regular backup of not just your code. Code's easy to pull back out of Git or whatever, but of your database and your data and everything else. We almost lost the business one time to getting hacked and someone wiping our servers. And the latest backup we had was from another engineer from probably like a month or something prior to when the hack happened. And the problem was that our colo facility, their backup back then was it was supposed to be offsite remote backup, and it wasn't. It was a hard drive attached to the USB port of one of our computers.
My God.
When we found that out, I was like, you gotta be effing kidding me. I thought my life was done at that point.
That puts perspective around thinking around when we used to use we'd lose like a quiz or like a term or an essay in college. I mean, that's something like, So last question I have for you guys before we drop. What's something that folks might not know about you guys outside of work?
Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay. I have a short list for this one. These are fun. So I've written several unpublished novels since I was a teenager, including an embarrassing amount of Star Trek fan fiction. I have a secret passion for cosmology, but I have no interest in going into space. And I once played a live rock show at the Satyricon, and I once played a Metallica song in a church.
That is awesome.
Not an Iron Maiden song, huh? I skateboarded for about 20 years. I don't think a lot of people know that or can tell nowadays because I've got a little bit of a belly. But I skateboarded the Powell and Peralta team in the Kingdom back when I was in 9th grade. That was kind of like a mini highlight of my youth. I was in a band for about 2 weeks with the last singer for All, the punk rock band. We had one practice. I went for my birthday down to Vegas when I was 21, and then came back. The band had broken up already. And then when I went to Real Networks, MP3 encoding and playback was really at its infancy, and I wrote my own encoder and player, which ended up kind of getting me my job at Real Networks. So my job at Real Networks was on the alpha version of the Real Jukebox player. So I thought it was having a cool project. I thought that was awesome. And then I live on a Christmas tree farm, which is kind of cool.
No, that is cool. And with everything that we just covered in the last, there's a lot I could ask, but I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. This episode was sponsored by Treehouse, not because they're paying me, because I'm wearing the t-shirt. They're doing some really cool things with the current pandemic. Encourage you guys to go check it out. Dan, Brandon, want to thank you again for being part of the show. Thanks again.